Yeah.
Welcome back to the Gridiron Expert. Conference championship games start tonight. We have a great matchup out in the Conference USA, the MAC, and of course the Pac-12 between Oregon and USC. But the biggest championship games, the ones with the biggest college football playoff implications, those kick off tomorrow. The SEC, the Big Ten, the Big 12, and especially the ACC, all are the biggest conference championship games of the weekend. And today, guys, we are taking a look at who's in the path to the playoffs for the top 7 teams in the last set of the college football playoff rankings. Of course, we all know how bad those rankings were, how bad those rankings are, but we have to deal with it. So we're going to take a look at the top 7 teams right now and the path for each to making the Final Four when those teams are announced on Selection Sunday. So let's go ahead and start up here at the top. Number 1, Alabama, and bear with us as we go from Alabama to Florida here. A lot to uncover, a lot of numbers to look at as well. Look at the Tide, the number 1 team in the country. They're in. Plain and simple. The path for some is easy. The path for some has already been clinched. Alabama has done that. Even if they lose to Florida in the SEC championship game, the Crimson Tide will not drop from number 1 to number 5. There is no way that they drop outside of the top 4 unless they were just annihilated. And I mean, we're talking 24, 31 points to Florida. And that's just not going to happen. So Alabama has clinched their spot in the playoffs. They will remain number 1 if they win. If they lose, they may drop to number 3, maybe number 4. I highly doubt that. But Alabama will be in the college football playoff. They will hear their name called on Sunday. Behind them is number 2 Notre Dame. They play number 3 Clemson in the ACC championship on Saturday. I believe that Notre Dame has already clinched a spot in the playoff. At least they should. Up here, for scenarios, we say to clinch their spot, they just need a win. Of course, if they beat Clemson, Notre Dame's a lock. But we say they should be in, should already be in. I cannot see the committee taking Notre Dame, a team that beat Clemson earlier in the year, has a quality win on the road against North Carolina, among a handful of other ACC teams, cannot see them dropping the Fighting Irish from 2nd to 5th, 3 spots, if they lose to Clemson. The only way that could happen is if Notre Dame gets annihilated, kind of similar to the Alabama scenario here. If Notre Dame were to go out there and lose by 24 points, 30-something points to Clemson, maybe the Fighting Irish would drop out. Even then, I would disagree with that in a way. So Notre Dame should have it clinched. They're not going to get blown out like that, at least in my eyes. If they win, they're in. If they lose, maybe they're the 4th seed instead of the 2nd seed. But Notre Dame should be in the playoff come Sunday. Clemson, number 3. They play Notre Dame. Tigers have to win. Here's the interesting scenario, though. Here's something we need to keep in mind. Yes, if Clemson beats Notre Dame, they are in the playoff and more than likely will be the 2 seed, will be the number 2 team in the rankings. So if Clemson wins, they go. If they lose, Clemson would be a 2-loss team. Their 2 losses, both coming to Notre Dame. One in South Bend, one at a neutral site in Charlotte. Both coming to Notre Dame, and this one would be at full strength, I should add, a full-strength Clemson team. And they would be a 2-loss team that did not win their conference. In theory, Clemson should not make the college football playoff in that scenario. A 2-loss team that did not even win their conference championship. But what the committee did down here with Florida this last weekend makes you wonder, will the committee, if Clemson loses to Notre Dame by a slim margin, we're talking 7 points or less, 1 possession, if Clemson loses a 1-possession game to Notre Dame, would the committee drop them 2 spots and outside of the top 5? And possibly usher in a Texas A&M, maybe an Iowa State, or possibly Florida if somehow they take down Alabama. That's the million-dollar question, guys, and my gut says they won't do that. My gut says that if Clemson loses a 1-possession game, they will just drop to 4th. And if that's the case, guys, your top 4 is practically set as of right now. This video would be pointless, and the conference championship games this Saturday would be pointless. Something to keep your eye on. Florida only dropped 1 spot after losing to a 3-5 LSU team at home, one where the Gators were favored by 23. Clemson if they lose a one-possession game to the number 2 team in the country at a neutral site, would they drop 2 spots? Based on the committee's actions as of late, they won't. Keep your eye on that. So Clemson, they win, they are in. If they lose, it will spark some discussion, but there's a very good chance the Tigers would only drop 1 spot, and that would be absolutely wrong. We'll touch more on that later this weekend, if that's, of course, how it folds out. Ohio State at number 4, the Buckeyes. They win, they're in. They play Northwestern. They're a top, 15 team right now in the Big Ten Championship. They win the game, they're in. They're 20.5-point favorites. I don't think anybody believes that Northwestern has a chance. I don't think anybody believes that Northwestern will win that game. So Ohio State wins the Big Ten. They go to the college football playoffs. Very good chance they remain at number 4. The problem with that, guys, of course, is this whole controversy with Ohio State so far this year. If Ohio State beats Northwestern, the Buckeyes are going to finish the season at 6-0. 6-0, while all other top 10 teams, every other current top 10 team, would finish the season with at least 9 games played. Ohio State would have played 6. Every other top 10 team would have played 9. Every top 3 teams, Alabama, Notre Dame, and Clemson, they will have finished their season with 11 games played. So you're talking 5 games that Ohio State just didn't have to play, and they're going to make the college football playoff. Let's also keep in mind that if you do not include Northwestern, Ohio State's 5 wins right now have come against teams that have a combined record of 16-21. Their best win came against Indiana, where they only defeated the Hoosiers by 7. Only defeated the Hoosiers by 7 in Columbus, a game where Ohio State committed 3 turnovers, allowed 490 yards, allowed 35 points, and nearly blew a 28-point lead. Let's think on that for a second. Indiana's a dang good football team, but do I think they're better than Clemson, Notre Dame, or Alabama? No, I don't. If Ohio State struggled that much against the Hoosiers, I know they came away with the win. I know they were up 28 at one point, but they almost blew it. If they struggled against Indiana, imagine how much they're going to struggle against Clemson, Notre Dame, or Alabama. It is extremely wrong that Ohio State is even playing in this Big Ten championship game, and I'm not a hater of Ohio State. I'm not dogging on Ohio State. I'm dogging the system. The Big Ten changed their rules to where the Buckeyes could get in because Ohio State was the best chance of getting a Big Ten team into the college football playoff. They were the best chance, so they changed the 6-game minimum, changed it to a 5-game minimum, or none at all, and Ohio State gets to play for the Big Ten title, and doing so will make the college football playoff with one of the worst resumes, in my opinion, in the country as of right now, at least among college football playoff contenders. They will make the Final Four, playing 5 less games than the potential other 3 teams that will be in the Final Four with them. Tell me where that makes sense. Tell me where that's okay. It's not. But if Ohio State wins, they're in. Texas A&M. This is where it gets interesting, guys. Outside the top 4, you've got the guys on the outside looking in. They need help. They need help to get into the college football playoff. Texas A&M. They have a road game against Tennessee this weekend. The Aggies, of course, have to beat Tennessee. If they lose, Aggies are done. If you beat Tennessee, and they need to beat Tennessee convincingly, I believe they can do that. Tennessee is a bit of a dumpster fire right now. Texas A&M beats Tennessee convincingly, and they need Clemson or Ohio State to lose. Now again, in that scenario we mentioned earlier, where Clemson maybe loses to Notre Dame by 1 possession, there's a chance they don't fall out. A&M gets left out in the dark, and that would be, of course, wrong. I don't believe a 2-loss team should get in if they didn't even win their conference championship. In that scenario, A&M's out. But for the sake of this scenario, let's say Clemson does drop out with a loss to Notre Dame. A&M slips in. Ohio State loses to Northwestern. A&M is in. So you beat Tennessee convincingly. One of these 2 teams in Clemson or Ohio State loses because I don't believe Notre Dame falls out with a loss to Clemson. The Aggies and Jimbo Fisher make the Final Four and maybe have a rematch against Alabama, the team that gave A&M their only loss this season. The Aggies falling by 28 to the Crimson Tide in Tuscaloosa. So that is the key here. That is the key here. And we're going to talk more on what Iowa State and Florida could do to Texas A&M here in a second. Iowa State, right now, they're at number 6, and this is the team that I think is the most intriguing going into conference championship weekend. The team that has the most interesting path to the playoff and could have the most interesting argument if things go their way. Iowa State plays Oklahoma, who is now the 10th ranked team in the country. The Cyclones play Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship game. If the Cyclones win that game, and I believe that they will, we are picking Iowa State to win the Big 12. If they beat Oklahoma, it would be Iowa State's 6th straight win, their 2nd win of the year over the Sooners. They would be a 9-2 Big 12 champion. 9-2 team, won the Big 12. If they win that game, and obviously the larger margin of victory, the better for Iowa State. If they dominate Oklahoma, their case increases drastically. But a win over Oklahoma, Clemson or Ohio State loses, and of course Texas A&M loses, Iowa State's in. Now hold on for 1 second. That is the guaranteed path for Iowa State. Beat Oklahoma, one of these two teams loses, Texas A&M loses, Iowa State, in my mind, absolutely gets in. Unless Florida beats Alabama, and we'll touch on that later. That's the guaranteed path. But take out this last part here. Let's say Texas A&M doesn't lose. Let's say that Iowa State beats Oklahoma. Let's say that Clemson or Ohio State loses in their conference championship game. Then the committee would have to decide between putting in a 9-2 Iowa State team that won the Big 12 championship or a 9-1 Texas A&M team who didn't even play for their conference championship and lost by 28 points to Alabama. That is where the committee would have to decide who gets that 4th spot. Here's the problem. The committee is biased towards the SEC. We have seen that time and time again, and certainly saw that this last week of their rankings where Florida only dropped 1 spot. I believe in that scenario, deciding between Texas A&M or Iowa State, I believe the Aggies get that 4th spot. Would I agree with that? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I can bet you right now the reason that Texas A&M would get in over Iowa State in that scenario is the committee would cite Iowa State's loss to Louisiana in the season opener. Ironic, considering that the loss to Louisiana really hasn't played a factor in the committee's rankings all season long. But when when push comes to shove, the last point, the last chance, the last spot in the playoff, do we put in an SEC team, a potential SEC rematch between Nick Saban and Jimbo Fisher, or do we put in an Iowa State team who no one really cares about? We're going to give it to Texas A&M. And we're going to say it's because they lost to Louisiana by 17. A Louisiana team that is currently a top 20 team right now. Louisiana, that loss has not been a factor in the committee's rankings, hasn't been a point of discussion in the committee's rankings. It will be if this is how the scenario plays out. And Iowa State fans, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, because that's not how it should be. You obviously need a lot of help to get there. This might not even happen. It might not even matter what we just mentioned. But if it does, I am willing to bet that A&M gets the edge over you. And that's extremely wrong. And then finally, guys, number 7 down here, Florida. It should be noted first that in the history of the college football playoff, no team ranked lower than 6th. And the final week, conference championship week, no team ranked lower than 6 has made the Final Four. So Florida's odds are already stacked against them. They're stacked against them even more with the fact that they're playing Alabama in the SEC championship game. Another game here where no one is giving the Gators a fighting chance because the Gators simply don't have the defense to stop Mac Jones, Najee Harris, Devontae Smith, and the Crimson Tide. But let's have some fun. Let's say Florida does beat Alabama, and they're not going to blow them out. It would be a dogfight. But let's say Florida does beat the number 1 team in the country. Well, Alabama stays in. We know that. So Florida, to get to the playoff, would need a win. It would be better if Iowa State lost for Florida. If they won, you would have a battle, and we'll talk about that in a second. But Iowa State loses, and Clemson or Ohio State loses. So Iowa State, they're out. Let's hypothetically say Clemson loses, they're out. So now you have a battle between Florida and Texas A&M for that 4th spot. If Florida, of course, beats Alabama. The committee would have to decide, do they stick to their head-to-head results, part of their criteria? Do they honor that? Texas A&M beat Florida earlier in the year. So would they give A&M that final spot above the Gators, or would they give Florida the final spot despite having 2 losses, but winning the SEC and knocking off the number 1 team in the country? In that scenario, I believe Florida should get in. If Iowa State loses, one of these 2 teams loses, and it's down to A&M and Florida, I know A&M won the head-to-head, but I think you have to give it to the Gators because no one has shown us that they could beat Alabama. No one this season has even come close, really, to beating Alabama. If Florida somehow does it, how can you leave out the SEC champion? How can you leave out the SEC champion? And you can't tell me that Florida should be left out because their LSU lost, because according to the committee, that LSU loss doesn't matter. It didn't happen. So that shouldn't play a factor. In the committee's eyes, Florida is still a one-loss team. And so really, what you're looking at here would be a one-loss SEC champion Florida, and they absolutely should get in over Texas A&M, even though the Aggies took down the Gators earlier in the year. So I know it's a lot to unpack, it's a lot to understand. It might be confusing, and it shouldn't be this confusing. But the problem is the committee has been so corrupt and so confusing and so inconsistent that we really don't know how they would handle the situation if something wild unfolded. Again, there's a very good chance the top 4 teams here are going to be your top 4 teams on Selection Sunday. Obviously, if these scenarios play out, that is what's going to happen. Even if Clemson does beat Notre Dame, that's what's going to happen. The only way you can see chaos, really, is if Clemson loses to Notre Dame. And that will then determine whether or not the committee says, all right, we're just going to move Clemson down 1 spot, or we're going to move them to 5th. And then you've got the battle with these 3 teams right here fighting for 1 spot. So there are paths to the playoff for every team on this list. And that includes A&M, Iowa State, and Florida. Some teams that aren't even giving them a chance. Some people aren't even giving these teams a chance. The path is there. Some more difficult than others, but it is there. And in 2020, as we've seen, anything is possible. Alabama is in. Notre Dame is in. Clemson is in with a win. Ohio State is in with a win. And I'd go ahead and give Ohio State a lock because I just don't see them losing to Northwestern. The ACC title game is where things could get interesting, guys. But again, this is 2020. We should be in for a fun ride on this conference championship weekend. For the Aggies, for the Cyclones, for the Gators, good luck to you all. May the odds be ever in your favor. I really do want to see some chaos this weekend. So guys, thank you so much for watching us here at the Gridiron Expert on YouTube, breaking down these wild college football playoff scenarios, hopefully scenarios and rankings that the committee will get right on Selection Sunday. And of course, we'll have analysis for that later on this weekend. As always, make sure to continue to like, comment, subscribe, share our videos, and check out everything down in the description below. Our Patreon account, our expert picks, our newsletter over on our website, thegridironexpert.com, our BetNow promo codes, and our merchandise now over on thewoovie.com. Check out the link for that down in the description. All of those things down there for you, the diehard college football fan. And once again, guys, as always, thank you so much for watching. Enjoy your college football weekend, and we will see you next time right here on the Gridiron Expert.